On this episode of the podcast, I have with me JD Williams. He's the Chief Data and Analytics Officer at Zoetis. We're going to be talking about change management and within digital adoption. So we're going to start off really understanding that digital fluency piece, about leading from the top, understanding how you work with stakeholders to ensure high degrees of adoption. And what are those impacts? Right? Change management has to go smooth for adoption to happen, and employees have to see the value. So we're going to touch on all these things with JD. Hey, JD, thanks for being on the show.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely. Before we start, tell everyone what you guys do at Zoetis.
So Zoetis is the world's largest animal health company. We're about $9 billion revenue annually, and global company, multiple countries all over the world. We make medicines for companion animals such as dogs, cats, and horses, as well as livestock. And these are things like vaccines, diagnostics, therapeutics, and so forth for the companion animals and the livestock that we enjoy every day. I don't know if you're a pet owner. I have a cockapoo in my own home here and benefits from the medicines that Zoetis produces as well. So we are end-to-end from R&D, manufacturing, and commercial.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, definitely that could be a whole episode in of itself, talking about pets and their health. And obviously, within the context of this discussion, we're going to be talking about change management within the digital space. I think that's a big topic. I think a lot of times we're talking about adoption. Digital adoption is critical. I guess you'd mentioned to me digital fluency and the importance within an organization. Maybe let's start there and kind of talk about what digital fluency is and that component.
Yeah, glad to talk about that. Digital fluency really refers to the amount of education, knowledge, and skills that colleagues have regarding digital tools such as AI, other technologies that they use every day that aren't necessarily AI, now with generative AI even more so. What we're finding is that these are new technologies that weren't necessarily taught in college or have to be adopted as these technologies evolve. And we're finding that colleagues need a little bit of help to get them started, to understand how to use the tools, and particularly how to use it for their tasks. So referring specifically to generative AI, we have rolled out enterprise generative AI tools, but colleagues ask, well, how does this apply to my particular role? And so how do we teach multiple different roles across the company and how to use it to fulfill their tasks? And so we want to make it personal. We want to make it real, tangible, and something that they can take home and actually work on every day, and not just have necessarily just general broad training or classes and so forth, but have peer-to-peer teaching. So that's when I think about digital fluency, I think at it from those multiple levels, but we really do have to get down to the level of the colleague and their specific tasks that they work on. So when we think of digital fluency, it's really a comprehensive view of upskilling our colleagues and helping them to achieve more productivity in their work through these AI tools as we're rolling them out throughout the company.
I guess when it comes to AI tools and where a company starts looking at this, obviously it's going to impact the company. That's very clear. We understand, people have to understand where those tools fit in. At an organizational level, who leads that charge?
Yeah, so I do in my company. That's part of my remit. So as part of my role, I lead a digital fluency team, as well as our AI and data platforms team, and AI capabilities team. And my digital fluency team is working very furiously and with a lot of energy to upskill our colleagues globally. And it's really exciting to see the work that they're doing. I have some great examples of the type of things they're doing that we can share here. But so I own digital fluency in the company.
Absolutely. As you kind of look at the business unit and you talk about change management, talk about your relationship and the dynamic of that conversation with stakeholders.
Yeah. So change is hard. So when I think about the task of rolling out new technologies and changing the way people work, think of the pyramid of technology, people, and process. And as a technology person, my PhD's in statistics, kind of grew up in the analytics space. Now I have data and other responsibilities. It's easy to focus just on the technology or algorithm component of that whole puzzle. But that's probably the 30% of the actual work that's required to successfully scale these technologies in a company. You also need things like, how do people change the way they work? So what's the process change? And not just that, do we have to change the skills required to do that AI-enabled task? So now we need to upskill our colleagues, so change the skills of the colleagues, as well as now change the processes in which they work. And so that's probably the bigger part. And getting that change management to be successful, it does require both a top-down support from our leaders, and we are so fortunate at Zoetis to have such enthusiastic leaders of AI at Zoetis, all the way to the top. So our CEO, Kristen Peck, is a very, very strong supporter of using AI tools throughout the company. In fact, it was just recently that she produced a productivity hack video, about a 1 to 2 minute video on how she's using Microsoft Copilot to do a task such as summarizing a document. And that's got proliferated throughout the company. Other things we're doing is we have an internal website called AI at Zoetis, which is the one-stop shop for an AI app store. What are the AI apps that are available for colleagues to use, how to use it, how to get access to it, recordings on trainings, etc. And we have an AI blog, which has the kind of the latest in AI technology externally. So we're pulling that in as well. We have our AI governance and other information there, and AI champions. So we have specific colleagues throughout the company that have raised their hand or just enthusiastic about deploying AI and using AI, that they said, look, I'll be a champion for my team and help to proliferate the AI tools throughout their teams. And so it is a top-down message that needs to be communicated, but there also has to be a little bit of ground up from the enthusiasm and energy. Yes, it's not just something being pushed down on me, but it's something that I really want to accomplish in my own team. And so that's why these AI champions are so critical for us to really scale our efforts. We're just a small team in digital fluency, but now we've greatly expanded our reach into all across the globe, many different languages, countries, and we have these local champions that will be training their individual teams, and we provide support and networking and tools and processes for them, and empowering them to change the ways they're working in their own teams. But that change management is a really tough thing. It really is a lot of people and process, which us technologists tend to not focus on as much as we should.
I think that's something I love talking about when it comes to change management, and when we start talking about Gen AI and just AI tools in general, is re-envisioning the work to be done and the impact on the person who's doing the work. Because I think as technologists, we have a tendency to think about that end solution delivering the product. I think the adoption piece, especially when it comes to something where we're going to impact workflow, we're going to change how a job is done, we're going to inject a piece of knowledge where previously that person was responsible for it potentially. I think all these make adoption to me an inflection point, because if people don't actually use it, the human in the loop concept, which is something a lot of people are talking about, becomes maybe a detriment to actual, a growth of the tool. Maybe talk to us a little bit about, as technologists, when we're working to re-envision somebody's job, leveraging these advanced technologies, how much more work could we do? Because I know we do it. You mentioned you do it, but how much more? What else can be done to actually understand some of those ins and outs and where that impact's going to lie?
Yeah, great question. And we ran into this in one of our internal Gen AI use cases as well, where we were able to solve technologically the use case that we were out to solve. But when it came to implementing it, we ran into these roadblocks of, okay, now we have to change the way people work. We have to change the skills that they have. And the organization just wasn't ready for that. And so then what we did was take a step back and say, all right, how can we do a process map of the entire process today from end to end? Are there things that we need to reimagine of that process in order to have these technologies, these AI technologies be enabled to accelerate components of it? Now, we may not necessarily have to redo the entire process end to end, but it's understanding those workflows and the skills required at each step. So that's what we're doing now to help us through that and getting our stakeholders engaged in that so that the end user has a voice at the table and saying, we're not just forcing this upon you, but now you're providing your voice of here's the process today. And what are the pieces of that we can enable to, from an AI perspective, to really expedite their work, at different points throughout the process. So process mapping, in short, is really important to understand that process, getting that stakeholder engagement, the voice of the customer. So voice of the customer, meaning our internal colleagues who are going to be the end users of these technologies, making sure that they are bought in the transformation process, and contributors all along the way. Because as they contribute to that, they're going to feel ownership more and want to then be part of that change.
You mentioned something I want to kind of come back to. Obviously, we're talking about the change management piece. We're talking about the solutions there and the adoption. From your perspective, when you're seeing stakeholders ask about Gen AI, they're asking about AI, how it can benefit them, what it can do for them. Is there an understanding of that ask and what the end result will actually be? Like, people obviously are hearing a lot about the solution, so people are asking about it. I know that, but what kind of gap exists from that ask to understanding what the actual end product will be and the impact of it?
Yeah, great question. I think that varies quite a bit throughout the company and depending on the role as well. And that's why these AI champions have been so beneficial, because they get it. They understand what the AI can do for them in those roles, and then help to bridge that gap with their colleagues, with their peers in their individual teams. And other things that we've been doing too is we've been holding basically Copilot 101 and Copilot office hours multiple times a week, up to 4 times a week for a half an hour each in multiple time zones to cover the entire globe. And we have a very energetic and enthusiastic team of digital fluency leaders that are running these meetings every week. And we have typically around 100 colleagues that join these meetings, each one every week all over the globe. And on average, they'll join multiple times. I think we're up to like almost 5,000 or 6,000 of our colleagues that have joined these. That's a very significant component of our entire company that have joined these office hours to try to learn how Copilot can work for them in their specific roles. And that's kind of the base level understanding. And then again, the AI champions will make it more real for them in their specific roles and functions. But understanding that gap, it is a bit of a challenge. And because of the diversity of work that happens across the company, that's why we as a centralized team aren't going to take it upon ourselves to solve that for everybody. We enable these AI champions locally to solve it for their teams. And that's what we found to be very successful.
Interesting. I guess when you're kind of looking at seeing the value in adoption, you mentioned they're asking for this. They're obviously hearing about these solutions. They're trying to help bring some of those process changes into play. When we're talking about actually seeing the value and potentially understanding the ROI, right? So I think we want the solutions to be additive. We need to understand the impacts to actually evaluate what the return looks like. That return, that ROI has been hard. I've been asking that question for, I guess, 4 or 5 years since I first started the show. And I'm still always curious when we're looking at these type of solutions, how an organization, especially with the stakeholders in mind, how do they evaluate just success, right? What does success look like? Is it adoption? Is it actually an incremental improvement in workflow? What does success look like in your perspective?
That's a really great question, and one that is, I think, needs to be taken very seriously in a company. And so what we've done, what I did is in an executive team meeting with our CEO and executive leaders earlier this year, I signaled that we would be working on creating a CFO-certified measurement plan. In other words, it's a measurement plan that our CFO and our finance organization can stand behind. And even if we wanted to report it externally, they would feel confident in reporting those value numbers externally. And so we've been working not just with business leaders, but with our finance team specifically on how to measure the impact of generative AI. And it comes in terms of hours saved. So there's hours of productivity. We don't actually like to use the word hours saved. We like to use the term hours gained. So how much productivity gain have we had? We have very bold and ambitious goals for productivity gain in Zoetis over the coming year. And measuring it, actually hours gained, comes from actually surveying colleagues and asking them how many hours they've saved or gained for doing these tasks. And we do it by roles, and we do it by function. And we're using some research as well, a combination of all these things. And we vetted our methods with our finance team, and they feel good about what we've done in terms of how we'll measure moving forward into next year our value. Now, that's just from an hours gain perspective. That's just, I think, kind of the base level. That's in the end of the day, I think of it like if you kind of visualize 10 boxes, and each box represents a colleague, and there's a sliver of work in each of those colleagues that these AI tools can offload from their plates. So kind of repetitive, administrative, or other kinds of tasks. And so if you take that sliver across those 10 and then combine them together, now you have an 11th colleague that's a digital or AI colleague that would potentially reduce the need to hire that 11th colleague down the road as the work continues to grow. So think of it as like a cost avoidance type of situation. So that's kind of along the hours gained perspective. But when it gets down to specific use cases, and here's where it's really important to work closely with your business partners in those areas of what does value look like for them. So in R&D, the biggest metric is how many months or weeks, even years of the total R&D timeline are we shrinking as we get products to market faster. It has enormous value. So how do we accelerate that R&D process to be first in class, the first in the market of a particular therapeutic area, best in class, first in class, best in class. That's our goal. And in order to do that, we have to move quickly in R&D. And so we're trying to establish baselines of what does a typical molecule or process timeline look like now for a product, and now inserting pieces of AI throughout the process. How does that accelerate? And it's a bit tough to try to measure that, but that's what we're committed to do. Is looking at that delta of what was the before and after in terms of time, because time is money when it comes to R&D. The faster you can submit a dossier to the regulatory agencies and get the response back and get a product in the market, it just has enormous commercial value down the road. Or when it comes to like our manufacturing, we're trying to understand how does this improve yields? So how does it reduce waste in our manufacturing processes? Can we make the process more efficient? And that has real OpEx implications as well. We're reducing our cost of goods sold when we increase our yields. Or in commercial, it's around how do we make our sales reps more effective? Can we give them tools that help them to understand their customer better, to understand what their needs are better, and understand when a customer may be looking to choose a competitor product instead of a Zoetis product? And so having those kind of predictive models to serve up in front of our sales team is also very powerful. And we measure what's the before and after, or what's the difference of using these AI-enabled sales tools versus not. And we're finding tremendous amount of value from that. So, real revenue implications there as well. So we take measurement very seriously. It's something that we will continue to focus on to tell the value story, because I think of it as a story. And so as we are storytellers, a job of a chief data and analytics officer is chief storyteller of the AI and data value that we gain in the company from utilizing these tools. And so I really see that as a key role of telling that value story of how we are gaining, in many ways throughout the whole process in the company.
I like that. I like the way you explain that, and I obviously the storytelling component makes complete sense. Maybe just a question to kind of tie a few things back. So obviously, you mentioned leading from the top, and you mentioned the CEO's interaction with digital adoption and the change management piece. When it comes to these bigger strategic pieces, around the Gen AI, when does change management get injected into the conversation, right? Because obviously, for some, people are just figuring out core capabilities around Gen AI, just running pilots. How soon It might be an obvious answer to the question, but I am curious, how soon should we be incorporating or looking at change management when it's potentially quote unquote disruptive technology, not disruptive in a bad way. It could be a positive way in this case, but when it is a technology change that has this much impact.
Yeah, great question. I do believe it needs to come earlier in the process than what I would typically in the past have thought of. And that's what we learned in this past year as we have quickly tried to prove the value of these generative AI tools. And after doing these proof of concepts, okay, now we want to launch it. Like, wait a minute, what does that mean? Now we have to do the change management. So if we had thought about that a little bit sooner, I think that would have had a smoother transition from proof of concept into a pilot production launch of these generative AI tools. So I do think that starting earlier is better. And even at the very beginning, and when we think about the business case of these generative AI tools, well, we have a thought or a hypothesis of what we can do with them and what change they can make. And so then thinking up front already, as we start the proof of concept, we should be thinking about, all right, so if this is successful, what is the change management required? And that actually may be a criteria to filter or prioritize, because if there's certain tools or processes that are easier to change from a culture perspective or other company change perspective, maybe those get bumped up higher up in the list, just because it's not technically feasible, yes, but is it operationally feasible? That's the other thing that we should check for as we prioritize these use cases up front.
I really think that's great insights. Overall, fantastic. I think all of the stories, all of the examples. I'm sure we haven't covered everything in the context of change management within digital adoption. If somebody does want to reach out to you to ask you something that we missed on the episode, what is a good way of contacting you, JD?
Yeah, great. I'm on LinkedIn, pretty visible there. I think I have something like 13,000 followers. So really happy to connect with anyone that'd like to connect with me on LinkedIn and continue the dialogue.
Absolutely. Thank you for your time. We'll make sure to include your LinkedIn in the show notes, but I do appreciate you coming on and sharing.
Thank you very much for having me. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. All right. That's it for this episode. We're back again, a different guest, different topic. Until then, two things. One, I think change management, I don't think we talk about it enough. I think it's something from a technology standpoint we need to think about earlier, as JD mentioned, make sure that we are leading from the top, make sure that the stakeholders understand the value so that they can actually adopt and get used to the changes that are coming their way. And with Gen AI, there's going to be a lot of those, and we're still figuring it out. So I think JD had some great examples, great stories. Obviously, they're kind of going through it as Zoetis, so he obviously shared a ton with us. And reach out to him if you guys do have a follow-up question. Until then, please like, subscribe, comment. Let me know how the podcast is going for you. I'll speak to you soon. Thanks. Bye-bye.